Nothing we do is all that original. Our systems are just ideas we've grabbed from other farmers and scaled them down to work on our homestead. What makes them unique, however, is how we've integrated them to work together on our space and feed our family year-round. The John Siskovich chicken tractors we raise our meat chickens in. The system of pulling those chickens in a loop around fruit trees and other crops, modeled off of how Peter Allen of Mastodon Valley Farm rotates pigs. Growing the Three Sisters corn, beans, and squash, which we learned from indigenous farmers at the Moses Conference a while back. And potatoes, well, we just grow potatoes like everyone else, but they're integrated in nonetheless. This system that we have set up on just a 1/4 acre of land is one of the most productive parts of our 5-acre homestead. And with the right planning, I believe it's scalable to just about any amount of land.
We recently had a conversation with someone who was getting ready to move onto the homestead property that they had just purchased. And his question was along the lines of, my wife and I both work full-time, we have kids, time is limited, so what should we focus on growing or raising on our homestead that's the best bang for our buck? Minimum time, maximum production. And it's a good question. And so kind of our answer was, aside from our family milk cow, which we still feel like pound for pound delivers the most food and nutrition for our family, much of our conversation was focused around this garden and orchard space, which we often call our Three Sisters garden, since that tends to be the most prominent feature. Fruit trees. We have 30 of them in this space, 3 rows of 10 each. Apple, pear, peach, plum, and cherries. They're so nice because you plant them once, prune them occasionally, and while they're an upfront investment, in just a few years you can have hundreds of pounds of fruit with minimal effort, both to enjoy fresh and to store away. Establishing this orchard of fruit trees for us early on in our homesteading journey was a no-brainer. It's perennial and is hands-off most of the year. The next thing we focus on are storage crops. And this makes up a huge percentage of the food that we eat really all year, but especially in the winter and spring. I don't know that I've ever seen a growing method out there that makes more sense and is a better bang for your buck time-wise than the Three Sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. Your corn grows up tall and strong in the center, and then beans are next and trellis up the corn. Then your winter squash fills in the gaps between it all, and those giant leaves shade out weeds and help retain water. So come fall, food literally explodes out of the entangled web of it all. So one of those rows between the fruit trees is always reserved for the Three Sisters, and the other is where we plant our potatoes, another highly productive and hands-off storage crop. One 150-foot row of potatoes and sweet potatoes gives us enough potatoes to feed our growing family of 6 right up until we're digging up potatoes for the following growing season. We've had other things growing on this 1/4 acre space before, like keeping some hives of bees, but the other staple for us here is raising chickens for meat. Every year we get 50 or so chicks in the early spring, pull them between these rows of crops and fruit trees and chicken tractors, let them fertilize everything along the way, and after just a couple of months of raising these birds on pasture, we're able to fill our freezers with enough whole chickens for our family to eat roughly 1 every week of the year. This space can tend to get a bit overgrown prior to planting, and so after pulling some of the temporary fencing that we had set up a few weeks prior to let our cows graze down the grass a bit, then we buzzed everything with the mower, and it's looking much less wild and ready to start prepping our rows for planting.
We mentioned biochar in our last video and how we incorporated it into our rows of vegetables in our kitchen garden. So we got a whole cubic yard of biochar from Tree of Life Biotechnology, which came in this giant bag on a pallet. From the research we've done, this stuff seems like it can be a game changer for your garden. Biochar is not all that different in look from regular char or ash from a fire, but it's actually remarkably different. It's produced by burning wood at very specific temperatures and lengths of time that produces this ridiculously porous and absorbent char material. Just 1/2 ounce of biochar contains the same surface area as a football field, which is just wild to me. The thing about that amount of absorbency is that you really need to inoculate your biochar before adding it as an amendment to your soil. A friend of mine knew of someone nearby with a horse farm that offers free, well-aged, and broken down horse manure. So we hopped in his truck, took a couple skid steer bucket loads off their hands, and shoveled it into an open compost stall we had. We also just got our little Kubota tractor back after it had been out of commission for a while, just in time for spring planting. I found it most efficient to scoop from our big bag of biochar using a 5-gallon bucket, and we loaded up a couple bucket loads of biochar and dumped that into the pile of compost. Another key ingredient in all of this is water, which helps to activate the biochar, allowing it to absorb and store away all those nutrients. So we brought a hose over and wet the pile down good before mixing, then we also continued to soak it down with the hose after we mixed the pile together. This little compost stall that I built with a couple of round fence posts and some 2x boards was the perfect space to turn over and mix the biochar and compost together. And just mentioning this, but Tree of Life Biotech has smaller sized biochar bags available other than the giant bag that we got. We plan to add biochar into our orchard eventually, and we'll add more to our compost piles and gardens over time. But for the average home gardener, you can get a cubic foot bag similar to like buying a bag of compost or potting mix at the garden center.
I've been asked a lot lately how it's going juggling pregnancy with everything that we do here on our homestead. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about how it's going with this current pregnancy. I just hit 24 weeks and I actually just had a birthday last week and turned 38. So in spite of being a little bit older, I actually feel really, really great this pregnancy. I would say just as good, or if not better, than pregnancies in the past. And I think a lot of this has to do with diet and lifestyle choices, but one of the things that I have been doing differently in this pregnancy is that I've been supplementing with prenatal vitamins from Needed. Honestly, I didn't take a prenatal with my last pregnancy. I just focused really deeply on my nutrition. And while my diet hasn't really changed for this pregnancy, I did have a few just really stressful life events that have happened over the last couple of years. So at the end of last pregnancy, I broke my ankle in 2 places, and then my mom passed away last year. And so these really stressful events can just cause pretty significant nutrient depletion. And so I felt like heading into this pregnancy, my nutrition status probably wasn't as optimal as it could be. And so I knew I wanted to supplement because pregnancy is such a nutritionally demanding thing, and I wanted to make sure I was getting everything I could for both myself and for baby. And so as I started researching, I was so impressed with both the quality and the completeness that Needed's prenatal vitamins offer. The 2 big things that I've noticed since I've started taking Needed's prenatals are, 1, my energy levels have been great. So in spite of a really full and busy spring, my energy levels haven't really waned from what they were prior to pregnancy. And even in the first trimester, when you tend to be really tired, I didn't really notice feeling my energy levels down that much. And then the other thing was with the first trimester nausea, the only times that I really noticed I experienced nausea were on days that I forgot to take my prenatal. And then usually as soon as I took it, within a couple hours, I would be feeling better. My typical routine is to take their prenatal pills each morning when I'm eating my eggs for breakfast. But lately, since it's been getting warmer, I've really been craving smoothies, and so every now and again, I'll make myself a smoothie that I'll drink throughout the day, and I'll use their prenatal powder and mix it into the smoothie. So their powder is such a great option, especially if you can't do pills or just want a break from taking all of those pills, especially in the first trimester. Definitely give their powder a try. Right now, Needed is offering 20% off your first order, and that includes one-time purchases or their already discounted subscriptions or plans. Just head to the link in my description below or use code FARMSTEAD at checkout.
After turning over our compost biochar pile good, continuing to add water to it, and letting it sit a couple days, it was time to add it to our rows. But first we wanted to do some initial tilling to prep them. I've been keeping my eye out for a used 3-point tiller for the back of our tractor for months now. Originally I was looking for around a 4-foot wide tiller. This would have been fine for our needs, especially with these long rows. But one of the things I learned is that typically you want to find a tiller that's at least the width of your tractor tires so it doesn't leave compacted soil behind when making your passes. So this meant finding something in the 56-inch to 60-inch range for our B-Series Kubota. It was coming down to the wire and we needed something fast. I found a good option on a newer, used 60-inch tiller. The problem was it was about an hour away and quite a bit more than I was hoping to spend. But the same day that I had scheduled to go get that one, a different 60-inch tiller popped up for $600 in the next town over from us and we jumped on it. Now, it wasn't perfect and it's definitely well used, but for the little bit we use a tiller each year, it was the right price and tool for the job. And after a little help from our neighbors getting the PTO shaft pulled apart that was totally seized up, it was exciting to mount it on the tractor and get it fired up. This thing is definitely a beast. We've always used our BCS 2-wheel tractor to till these rows in the past. It worked alright, but our BCS is old and pretty janky, and it seemed like it took a million passes to get both the consistency and depth we wanted in loosening up the soil. Plus, it was really difficult to smooth things out on our Three Sisters row, where we formed mounds. The BCS just couldn't handle the up and down very well. So since we had a tractor now, finding a tiller for that was definitely the route to go. This Howard tiller we got is more of a commercial grade machine, and we knew it would probably give our 26 horsepower tractor a run for its money, but we took it slow, dropped it into low gear, and after 2 passes the soil was looking beautiful for planting into, especially for things like potatoes that do best in well broken up soil. Now we could start adding the compost. It was nice to be able to utilize the compost stall to easily get bucket loads. We just tried to distribute it in piles as evenly as we could with the tractor. Then we came in with rakes and tried to spread things out by hand a bit so that the biochar and compost would get distributed evenly in the rows. We probably could have left it like that and planted, but while I had the tiller on, I gave it one more pass in each row so everything was mixed together nicely. Now the rows were prepped and ready to go.
We decided to start with the Three Sisters row, which requires a little extra prep before planting. So what we do is form a circular mound about every 4 feet. The mounds end up being about 2 to 3 feet wide, and on these mounds is where you plant your corn, and then your beans are also planted on the mounds after the corn pops up and is established, usually a week or 2 later. Then between the circular mounds, we form smaller mounds where we plant the squash, usually at the same time or shortly after we plant the beans. This mound that we make is not as tall as the corn and bean mound. It acts as somewhat of a bridge between the round mounds. And you don't have to mound up for the squash, but we found it's helpful for running our straight lines of drip irrigation over there so there aren't as many up and down bends. Honestly, forming these mounds is typically the most exhausting and time-consuming part of planting this garden. We pull in the soil for the mounds with a rake and then smooth it out and level it all by hand. And while this is pretty exhausting work, it's also so satisfying to look back at the row and see the beginnings of this ancient technique that's also been done by hand for generations. We've always grown dent corn for our Three Sisters garden in the past, and our favorite variety has always been the Oaxacan green dent corn, but we have so much of that corn stored away right now, years worth, and we've always wanted to do sweet corn, so we decided to give that a try in our Three Sisters garden this year. We went with the Stowell's Evergreen Organic Sweet Corn variety from Seed Savers, and the thing about dent corn is that many varieties grow really tall and strong stalks that work really well in the Three Sisters system for trellising up the beans. We've had Oaxacan green dent corn reach 11 feet high before. And we've heard sweet corn can work, but you want to make sure you find a really hardy, taller variety. So we're hoping that's what this is going to be. On a side note, we did try popcorn in our Three Sisters garden one year. Don't do that. We didn't realize that the stalks only get like 3 to 4 feet high, and while we did get a nice supply of popcorn from it, the beans just didn't really stand a chance trellising up the corn, and the whole thing just looked kind of sad and flopped over. To plant, our kids turned to a tool of precision, a little poker dibble and a magnetile. We plant 4 stalks of corn per mound, and you want to plant each kernel of corn about 1 inch deep and 6 inches apart. So this 6 by 6 inch square magnetile makes the perfect template. We just lay that down centered on the mound and then poke a hole in each corner, and our kids plop a corn kernel into each hole and then cover it back up. One thing that was really nice this year with the bigger, more robust tiller is that typically in the past when we've used the smaller BCS tiller, there would still be a pretty good amount of grass clumps and other weeds that we'd be pulling out of the soil as we were forming these mounds to plant into so that those weeds wouldn't get reestablished. But the new tiller did such a good job of churning all those things up, so we had to do really little in the way of pulling out weeds and grass, which helped save a lot of time.
Before jumping to planting potatoes that afternoon, we were in desperate need of getting our meat chickens out on pasture in our chicken tractors. I don't like putting them out there until we have the rows planted, since we do so much running through there with the tractor to prep the beds. So since we were later on our planting this year from being tied up with our movable chicken coop project earlier this spring, we were also late to getting our chickens out on pasture. Part of that was due to the fact that after we moved our flock of laying hens into the new eggmobile coop, that freed up their coop in the barn, which made a fine place to keep the meat chickens for the time being. Nothing has really been ideal about our meat chicken situation this year. Ever since our first year raising meat chickens, where we did a side-by-side comparison between Cornish Cross and Freedom Rangers, we've landed on Freedom Rangers being our preference, so much so that we really never wanted to raise white Cornish Cross chickens again. Well, when we went to order our chicks a few months back, we were shocked to find that they didn't have Freedom Ranger chicks available this year, and most everywhere else didn't either due to supply chain issues, and Cornish Cross was really our next best option. Let's just say this spring has been a good reminder of why we really don't like raising Cornish Cross. We raised them in the same brooder setup where we only lost 1 of our 30 new laying hen chicks this spring, but after starting with 60 Cornish Cross chicks, we're down to about 40. And that was with doing everything we could to nurse the little ones back to health, regulate temps, and check on them super often. It was like a good chunk of them just didn't have the will to live, and they seemed to have a tendency toward health issues even when fully grown. The ones we have now seem to be doing fine, and we're glad to be getting them out on pasture. We've really liked the Siskovich chicken tractors we built a few years back. John Siskovich's book gives very detailed step-by-step plans on how to build them. His plans call for a tarp as the roof, but we modified ours to have a metal roof, which has worked out great, and we made a blog post showing how we did that. We move these tractors twice a day when we go out to do morning and evening chores. This gives the chickens access to fresh grass and bugs often, and also keeps the coop clean while spreading their manure evenly across your field or yard. It's also a nice benefit that when you go to process them, their feet are super clean, which is great if you keep those for making bone broth like we do.
We are always checking the weather these days, and we knew that we were supposed to get a good rain overnight, which is why we wanted to get everything in the ground. But about halfway through moving our chickens out into their tractors, it got really dark, and out of nowhere the skies just opened up on us and a spring storm came rolling through. It rained really heavy for a good hour or two. It's always an adventure. Thankfully, things cleared up enough that afternoon to get the rest of the chickens out into the tractors and also set up electro-netting around this garden area. So the electro-netting both helps to protect our meat chickens, but also helps to protect our crops through the growing season. It's not perfect, and bunnies and smaller critters can still get through there, and we'll lose a few squash to mice and whatnot each year, but thankfully it's been really effective against keeping larger predators away, and we've never had any incidents with anything getting into our chicken tractors, thankfully.
I mentioned Peter Allen of Mastodon Valley Farm earlier. He runs a regenerative farm in southwest Wisconsin, and I had the chance to spend a week there several years ago for their regenerative farm design course they offer geared toward farmers and homesteaders. He was just getting it established then, but one of the things that stuck with me was this ingenious loop system he created where he planted hundreds, if not thousands, of nut and fruit trees in this track or loop around a large hayfield. Once those trees were established, his plan was to rotate his pigs through paddocks around that loop where the pigs could forage a decent percentage of their food from what the trees produced and dropped. That loop system was part of the inspiration for what we're doing here on a much smaller scale with our meat chickens. We don't really intend for the chickens to eat our crops or what the fruit trees produce, which is why we raise them earlier in the season. But they do help fertilize this area of land as we bring them around in the tractor, and it also works out really nicely to pull them in a big oval loop. By the time they make it back to where they started, the grass has grown back in again for them to eat. I've had the thought too that, kind of like what Peter's doing at Mastodon Valley Farm, if we're raising pigs in the future, we can probably figure out a way to run pigs through here in the fall to clean up anything that's left over after we get into harvest. And speaking of trees, we got all of our fruit trees from Fedco, and we're so glad we did. We've heard from a lot of people that get trees from a local garden center or hardware store, and a good chunk of them don't end up making it, and it's a really frustrating experience. Imagine making the money and time investment of planting trees on your property, and then the lost time of having to replant them if they don't establish and needing to restart the clock before they start fruiting. Yes, you may pay a bit more from Fedco, but all of our trees came with a really solid root structure to start out with, and they all took and have been thriving since. Of the 34 Fedco trees we've planted, only one hasn't made it, and that's because a bunny chewed the trunk of the tree away to almost nothing, and we caught it way too late. We planted ours in 2021 and some in 2022, and most of the trees have started producing fruit by now, which is so exciting to think of how much food this orchard will produce in the years ahead.
That night, it did continue to rain all night long and through a good chunk of the next day as well. And so the ground was completely saturated. We were still hoping to plant our potatoes that afternoon. Now, in the past, I could have seen us deciding to plow ahead, feeling the pressure to get these potatoes in the ground, even knowing that the mud would have majorly slowed us down and really made for a terrible experience. But maybe we've learned from previous mistakes, and after thinking it through, realized what's one less day for the potatoes being in the ground in the long run. And so we decided to let things dry out a bit, wait a day before planting. And this was really a win-win. At this point, we were all feeling pretty exhausted, and having a day to both let the land dry up and let our bodies recover a bit was just what the doctor ordered. A few days later than we were planning, but potato planting day is finally here. So it's time to pull our seed potatoes out of the basement and get them in the ground. And as you can see from the sprouts being massively long, they are ready. This is how our potatoes we set aside for seed look every year come planting time, and they've always taken and produced really well for us. But it's definitely not optimal to have sprouts this long. They get this long because they're searching for light. So our hope for the future is to try and pull them out of our dark basement sooner and figure out a way to expose them to light. Last year was our first year growing sweet potatoes, and since the rows are around 150 feet long, we landed on doing 1/3 of the row being sweet potatoes and then 2/3 being potatoes. And we're sticking with that again this year. So the first thing we did was measure out 100 feet for planting the potatoes into.
Since our BCS really only gets used in the spring and then it sits there the rest of the year, I'm always super relieved to get it fired up again. Thankfully this year it was pretty simple. We really won't be using our tiller attachment too much for it anymore, but we'll keep it around because this rotary plow attachment is perfect for quickly digging a trench to plant potatoes into. Having a tool like this totally isn't necessary, but since we have it, it's so nice to get a deep trench quickly and in just one pass. The alternative is just getting in there with a shovel and digging a trench by hand, which we've done in the past, and it just takes longer. We've also switched to making our potato rows double wide, which worked out nicely for us last year, and with some more space to work with since our rows are a bit wider with the 5-foot tiller we picked up, the 2 rows should work out even better. Since the rotary plow kicks dirt to the side, we make a trench on one side first, then we come through and trench the row on the other side once we plant in the first trench.
So make sure that each potato has at least a couple eyes. We're starting with planting our red potatoes first since we have quite a few of those. These potatoes are actually growing on us, so we want to grow more of them this year. Our primary storage potato has been the Elba in the past, which is a white potato, but we've realized that we actually like eating the red potatoes better, and they seem to be storing just as well as the Elbas for us. You can see that the sprouts are relatively short, and the potatoes are still firm and big and not shriveled at all. Since they're pretty good size and we want to stretch them as far as we can, we're going to cut most of them in half. Yes, it's best to cut your seed potato a day or two in advance and let them heal up before planting, but we didn't do that, so here we are, and we've usually had them do just fine cutting them the day of planting in the past. The way that we figured out to make this 2-row system work so that we have an even amount in each trench is to plant one potato, and then as we plant that one potato, we set one aside that's going to be planted in the other row. So that way we've already portioned out each seed potato for the next trench, and once we're there, it keeps everything nice and even. We plant our potatoes about a foot apart, and if they're a cut potato, you want to put the cut side down in the trench. Other than the red potatoes that we cut, we're just planting the whole potato in the ground. So we started with the reds, and next we did our Elbas. Then we did a smaller amount of both Adirondack Blues, which are a purple potato, and Corollas, which are a really delicious creamy yellow potato. Both the Adirondack Blue and Corollas aren't the best storage potatoes, but we really enjoy eating them. They're also the ones with the really long sprouts, so we just leave the sprouts on the potato, lay them on their side in the trench, and cover it all up. We also try to plant them in the order we'll be harvesting. So if we start harvesting at the end of the row earlier in the season, we'll start with the Corolla and the Adirondack Blue and eat through those earlier. Then we'll wait a little bit later in the season on harvesting the Elba and the red potatoes, and those will be good through the winter. We're still eating through some Elbas from last year right now. After that first row is planted, Jim does another pass with the BCS rotary plow on the other side and form that second trench. It works really nice because the dirt actually covers up some of that first trench that we made. And then I toss the potatoes across to my daughter that we portioned out, and she plants them on the other side down in the trench. The last step is covering up the trenches. So since some of the potatoes were pretty well past their peak as seed, we didn't want to mound them over too deep. What we'll probably do is just fill the trench in over the row and level it out for now and wait for the potato plants to come up. And once they pop through in the next few weeks, we'll come back and mound some more soil over the potato plants to mound them up a bit more. And this should also help to take care of some of the early weeds that form.
Potato time.
Alright. Should we go get the shovels?
Yeah. Last year we bought 100 sweet potato slips, which was the perfect amount for a double 50-foot row. We kept hearing how easy it was to grow your own sweet potato slips, so we decided to give that a try this year. It's hard to predict how many slips you'll get from each sweet potato, but we read it can range between 10 to 30-ish. So for the 100 we needed, we set aside 13 sweet potatoes to grow slips with. Guys, it really was as simple as can be to grow our own slips. All we did was put about 2 inches of potting mix in a flat seed tray. Then we just placed the sweet potatoes in the tray, wet the soil down around the sweet potatoes, and then continued to keep it moist. We also kept them upstairs in our front window since you want them to be both warm and have light on them. For maybe a month, there really didn't seem to be anything happening. But then we started to see these little tiny sprouts begin to form, and then after a few more weeks, they started growing into longer sprouts and leaving out. As the sprouts reached maybe 8 inches to a foot long, we just snipped them off near the base and collected them in jars filled with water. In just a day or two, you'd see roots beginning to form, and they're basically ready to plant at this point. Probably the most challenging thing with starting your own slips is getting the timing right with all of it. You don't want to start them too late because it really can take a while for the sweet potatoes to kick into gear and start producing slips. We started ours back in February, and I think that was about the right timing. Some of the earliest slips we collected had rotted away by the time we got to planting, but we were able to cut a ton of fresh slips over the last month or so, and it ended up being almost exactly 100 slips, so it was perfect. You plant slips pretty much like you do a seedling, just putting the root down in the ground, gathering soil around it, and pressing it in firmly. We plant them roughly every foot. I did come through beforehand and dug out a small trench that made planting them in a straight line a bit easier. Alright, potatoes are planted, corn is planted, our smaller kitchen garden closer to our house is in swing. It feels good to have all that behind us. The last thing we need to do now is get our drip irrigation in. I can't even tell you how many hours we used to spend watering our gardens before we made the investment about 4 years ago to get drip irrigation, and it's been an absolute game changer. We got our drip system from Drip Depot, and it was pretty easy to get things set up for both our kitchen garden space, which is shorter rows, and then the longer rows we have for the Three Sisters and potatoes. We actually even ran drip in the rows we planted our fruit trees the first year, and that was really helpful as they were getting established. Drip systems can be customized for just about any garden space, raised beds, planters, or really any garden setup that you have. Putting in drip here in this Three Sisters garden space has really helped maximize what this garden produces, and it's really simple. And you never know when a dry stretch or a year of drought might pop up, and having this drip really helps everything thrive when things dry up. Alright, you guys ready to run our drip tape out?
Yeah! Yeah!
Here we go! To infinity and beyond! Here we go! There, come on! We got a tangled mess, guys. I don't have a good spool or anything to roll the drip tape back onto for storage every year, so I still haven't quite figured out the best way to store it. I've folded it all up and stored it in a tote this year, which worked out fine enough, but But as you can see, it was a little bit of a tangled mess when we pulled it out. We just do one run of drip tape right down the middle of our Three Sisters row, which has always worked out well to keep everything watered. And with the potatoes, we've moved to 2 drip tape runs for the 2 rows of potatoes we plant now. We set the whole thing up on an automated system where they run early in the morning for an hour in each garden space. The drip tape delivers water directly to your garden rows super efficiently with way less evaporation and wasted water than you get from an overhead sprinkler system. All your watering is your garden plants and not necessarily weeds and grass.
After a week, our sweet potato slips have taken root and will soon start sprawling. The chickens are enjoying the fresh green grass and sun. The corn is popping up, and we're going through and planting our beans around the corn, and then we'll plant butternut squash in the smaller mounds between the corn and the bean mounds. We've usually done 6 bean plants per mound, and then we'll plant 2 to 3 butternut squash seeds between the mounds. The beauty of the system is that it can be highly customizable to your scale and setup. If you happen to have a long rectangular 1/4 acre piece of land and want to replicate exactly what we've done, that's great. But even just several mounds of the Three Sisters, 30 feet of potatoes, or building a small chicken tractor to raise a dozen or so chickens at a time for meat, planting some fruit trees here or there can produce a ton of food for you and your family.